I'm not normally behind the camera, but this segment is on entertainment. Welcome to Willow Glen in Motion. My name is Kevin Swanson, and I will be your host. When you think of the performing arts, you think of Broadway, Hollywood, Nashville, New Orleans, and Willow Glen, right? Surprisingly, yeah. Through the years, Willow Glen has offered a multicolored palette of creativity for the entertainment industry. Jazz, motion pictures, musical theater, all being nurtured by extremely talented, dedicated, and creative people. One of the families that has supported the performing arts in Willow Glen for generations is the Lima family. They have built the very first movie house in Willow Glen, and it wasn't the Garden Theater. But I'll let Bud tell you that story. As we continue to explore the performing arts here in Willow Glen, we're at the Garden Theater building once again. This time we have the opportunity to speak with Bud Lima. His connection to the Garden Theater we'll talk about a little bit later, but let's meet Bud first. Bud, welcome.
Thank you. Very good to be here. You're bringing back a lot of old pleasant memories.
Well, let's talk about some of those memories, Bud. How long have you lived in Willow Glen?
Well, I got out of the Army in 1946, January, and bought a house on Louise Avenue and established my home. Took over management of the old Willow Glen Theater, which is just up the street, across the street. And then my dad and I built this in 1948.
So the old Willow Glen Theater was located where?
The old Willow Glen Theater was up here on Lincoln Avenue, just this side of Minnesota, about 4 doors down on the east side of the street. It was called the Willow Glen Theater. It was built sometime back in the middle 30s, and my dad took it over during World War II.
So then why did you decide to build this theater here?
In those days, the theater business was busting at the seams, and the old Willow Glen Theater had only a little over 400 seats, and we built the Garden with 1,100 seats so we could compete with the downtown theaters.
And so you built this theater in what year?
We started construction in 48 and opened in June of 49.
Do you remember the first movie that was shown here?
Yes, the Song of the South, the Walt Disney program, and Knock on Any Door with Humphrey Bogart. Well, there's lots of the pictures of the opening of the theater that are published around here. I've seen them in the newspaper and so forth. And the marquee shows those too, so that reminds me periodically.
So at some point, you and your family sold this theater.
Well, I left the theater here in 1958. My education was engineering. I had schooling at UC Berkeley and MIT, and San Jose State offered some opportunities, so I went down to San Jose State and became a professor there in 1961 until I retired in 1968.
And so what happened to the Garden Theater after that?
The people who were running it bought the property from my dad and ran it as a Mexican theater for a few years, but apparently financially they weren't making it either, so they sold the building to somebody who wanted to remodel it into its present state.
So what happened to the old Willow Glen Theater?
Well, when we opened the Garden, we continued to operate it for a few years under the name of the Vogue Theater, and we ran foreign films there at that time, but it didn't last too long, and eventually my dad sold the property, and one of the first tenants there was Ed's Hobby Shop, and the other one was a men's clothing store by a fellow by the name of Don Drysdale, who was the uncle of the famous Dodger pitcher by the name of Don Drysdale.
Now, Bud, you've, besides living most of your life here and playing an instrumental role in the performing arts in Willow Glen, you've also played an instrumental role in a number of other things here in Willow Glen.
Well, I was a charter member of the Willow Glen Lions Club, which we formed in January 1947. And that included all of the business and professional people on the street from Minnesota down to Coe Avenue. We had quite a number of people.
So you said you taught at San Jose State. How long did you do that?
Well, I started teaching there in 1961 and eventually became the Associate Dean of Engineering. I also taught electrical and computer engineering. Matter of fact, when I was Associate Dean, that was a half-time position, and the other half-time was teaching primarily graduate courses in both computer engineering and electrical engineering.
Bud, we really want to thank you for taking the time with us at Willow Glen in Motion and telling us the history of the performing arts in Willow Glen.
It's been my pleasure, and I've enjoyed the recollections. You brought back a lot of memories for me.